Ein Tiba, which is, of course, Arabic for Achtung, Achtung. I know, we've had Arabic on before, but you try coming up with new languages when you're into your third century of podcasts. And anyway, if you're downloading, I know we're well past the double ton. Anyway, if you are downloading this on the day of publication, it's November the 10th. But what happened on November the 10th, Uncle Al? I hear you cry. Well, Winston Churchill attended the Lord Mayor's lunch in London and uttered these words.
Now, it's not the end of the... It is not even the beginning of the end. It is perhaps the end of the beginning.
And why did he say this? Because we were on the cusp of winning the Battle of El Alamein.
Oh, we'd won it.
Shattering...
Won it by then.
What? We'd won it, but we won... Yeah, we'd won
Completely
it.
won it. No, that's Operation Torch, isn't it?
Well, yes, it depends, though, when you regard winning Alamein as, you know, is it when Rommel's in full flight? Or is it the end of the actual grinding encounter? And if you're a Monty's too slow man, you think he doesn't win at Alamein anyway.
I've got to say, though, of all Churchill's rhetoric, and you know I'm a big, big fan, I think that is just the biggest load of guff anything. It just doesn't mean anything, does it?
No, of course not. No. And there's stories of people on the eve of D-Day, Americans taking the piss out of it. You know, this is not even the end of the beginning of the end and all this, you know. And Milligan's is we begin the Beguine and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
But I mean, but you know, church bells rang and, you know.
It was a big thing. It was a big thing. They captured Von Thoma.
Yeah. Well, in a big proper victory on schedule as well. It wasn't like we weren't caught out by it either. It wasn't one where you go, oh, we won that. That's nice.
Yeah.
It was things going according to plan, I think, is the thing that characterises Alamein.
Yes.
That you've come up with an answer. You've figured out how to make the army you've got work.
Yeah.
And you've lured the desert fox into a trap, haven't you?
Yeah. I mean, you haven't been there, have you? Or have you? I can't remember. Okay, it is a really amazing place because it actually, in the kind of sort of 40 miles of the Alamein line from the coast all the way down to the Qattara Depression, the landscape does change quite a lot. And one of the things that's really noticeable is up near the north, it's much sandier. There's quite a lot of vetch and stuff, but it is really, the soil and the sand is much finer. Whereas further down towards El Haimat, Hemaimat which is this sort of weird, odd feature that just sticks up just on the edge of the Qattara Depression. It's much, much stonier. So in other words, the going is much better for armour and you know, I think it's 10 corps, isn't it? Is the corps de chasse, as he calls it. It's odd that he chooses as his primary slot where he chooses. And it's also a very, very odd use of artillery because he's got these, whatever it is, 850 guns or whatever it is, I can't quite remember. But only about a third of them are in line with the main assault bit. The rest of them are sort of spread out across the whole line. And they're also just firing straight ahead. So you've got all these guns. So, you know, there's lots of accounts of people kind of seeing the opening barrage of El Alamein and people flying overhead and seeing it and this sort of streak of fire cutting across the land and all the rest of it. But what they're not doing is firing in concentrations. And it's a really, really odd fire plan because what you'd have thought they would do is you'd have... So I can't remember precisely what the guns are, but let's just say for argument's sake it is 850, that you would have maybe 650 in that top corridor and then the other 200 sort of spread a little bit further down as a sort of, you know, as a sort of deception. And you'd have those 600 all pummeling kind of, I don't know, 500 metres of line.
Well, so doing stonks, basically.
Doing massive stonks on one area.
Yeah.
And then going on to the next one, and then going on to the next one. But actually what you've got is each gun is just firing straight ahead.
Yeah.
And so that's why the minefields aren't as destroyed as they are and the mine isn't. And it's exactly the same issue that they have in the First World War, really.
So why has he got that fire plan?
I don't know, because I think this is where Monty...
Well, because one of the big reorganisations is in artillery, isn't it? That they have got their act together organisationally in terms of command by that point, haven't they?
Yeah.
Far more in 8th Army than they had up to that point. And it's, you know, the great arguments about Montgomery arriving in the desert is he inherits systems that are revolving and in place, and you know he's lucky to turn up when he does because he gets things. He arrives when things are actually beginning to click properly.
Yes,
which is true, but also kind of
no. I don't think it is true actually. I don't think
But
it is.
it's true to an extent, isn't it? That they are getting their shit together far more by the end of the year, aren't they? By this time.
Well, in the July battles for the first Battle of Alamein is in July when 8th Army streaming back. They've already got some divisions in reserve, so they can already kind of hit in the line. The rest of 8th Army gets behind the Alamein line, which has already been prepared, so it's in reasonable order. Then Rommel comes in, and the first battle of the first sort of main assaults, I think, is around the sort of 5th, 6th of July off the top of my head, 1942, and Auchinleck's 8th Army, he's now taken over direct command, as well as being Commander-in-Chief of the Middle East. He's also 8th Army Commander as well, having sacked Ritchie. And he manages to hold the Germans, and then he goes slightly on the counterattack in the second half of July. And what happens is this kind of sort of big bloody attritional fight where kind of no one really wins, but it does sort of buy them time. I think the only thing that has changed in July is that his lines of supply are shorter, and that Rommel's, having charged all the way across the north of Egypt and come from Tobruk and having been involved in this heavy battle without much replenishment in May and June 1942, is kind of, they're just a bit spent. So I think that is why. I don't think there's anything new really about what Auchinleck is doing that's different from Ritchie and co. I think what you see in August when Montgomery and Alexander turn up, it's Alexander ahead of Montgomery who goes, right, there will be no more retreats. And there aren't, bar kind of, Arnhem and stuff like that and crossing back over the river. Basically, there are no major retreats at all. It's always going forward. And I think that whole mindset thing completely changes. And there is a kind of whole restructuring and reorganisation that then goes on in that interregnum period. And that is the whole point after Alam Halfa, which is the end of August, beginning of September 1942, up until the kind of third week of October when Alamein, the Second Battle of Alamein, is launched by Montgomery. That period, that kind of 7-week period, is all about retraining, re-equipping, bringing in the Shermans, a bit more Shermans, kind of getting yourself all sorted and all the rest of it. And I think where Montgomery excels is in that operational level. I think where he's always a bit wanting is on the tactical level. And I think that the tactical shortcomings of Montgomery are revealed at the Battle of Alamein, because although it is a great victory and a notable victory, actually it should have been a lot quicker and a lot easier, really, compared to what he's got. And
but that's also him. But that's also him thinking in terms of what he can do with this army that he's got, what he can actually do with it, what it's actually capable of, and the tactical shortcomings, if you want, or is it his notorious caution to protect his men's lives? Which these things are, you can explain them kind of satisfactorily in either direction, can't you? You can say it's him being cautious, or you can and he's being cautious because he knows what 8th Army's capable of, what it isn't capable of, and he's not going to try and do things that go wrong so that his men lose confidence in him. So it's it's that sort of conundrum, isn't it? If he sets them an impossible task that they're not up to, and they fail in it, then that damages, his relationship as their commander and all that sort of thing, which he's seen happen again and again and again. He's obviously been paying attention to what's been going on in the desert, and that's what's been going on, or the whole British Army's been watching, because after all, the desert is the experimental theatre, if you want, for a couple of years, where you get to fight the Germans and figure out how to beat them, and they spend 2 years failing to figure that out, don't they? Really.
Yes, well, to a certain extent. I mean, there are some successes in that, of course. Don't forget.
Yeah, but the successes are never the things you learn from, are they?
Yeah.
Generally, they're the things that make rash. If you look at the Germans, they don't learn from their successes particularly, do they? They then go and double down on the things that they think won things for them. And Montgomery must know. He must know, if I try and do things too snazzy with 8th Army, they won't work, and we will get stuck here. And if we get stuck here, I mean, he's not just worried about his own job. He's obviously worried about, command. Because after all, being a general at this point, you're eminently fireable, because Churchill's into firing generals at this stage of the war. He's quite happy to do it. So I don't know. I just sort of think.
Yeah, no, I just remember when I was trying. I just think there's a problem with the fire plan, because it's straight ahead, and I think his head of his CRA should have known better, and frankly, he should have done. I mean, you fire concentrations, you don't fire straight ahead. So I think I think that is putting your men's lives at greater risk, because you're not going to destroy as much of the enemy defences as you might do if you fire concentrations. I think the second problem is that it's just the main line of attack is too far north. So you've got, in the enemy minefields, you've got these minefields, and then you've got this weird arm that extends back westwards, which divides the line in two. And as a rule of thumb, it's not absolutely the case, but most of the Italians are in the southern bit under that line. And most of the Germans, most of the Panzer Corps, Afrika Corps rather, is in the northern bit. So you don't want to go south of that line, because then you're going to have to work your way all the way around it, and that's going to be a pain in the arse and difficult. So you do want to be in that northern bit, but I would have said you wanted to, the main line, having walked the ground, it would have been more sensible to attack just above that northern line. And I know why he didn't, is because he wanted to go there and then exploit either side. But the problem is that ground in that northern bit is so much finer, and you've got these very, very narrow channels which are going across. You've got these 3 holes that are being punched. I think it's 3, or was it 2? They're being punched through the minefields. So your armour infantry and armour are following behind, and what it turns into is basically talcum powder, a massive dust, just coating everything, coating the engines, coating the eyes, getting in the lungs and noses of absolutely everybody. And the going is really, really tough. Whereas had they gone a little bit further south, just in the north of this kind of sort of east-west line of mines, which sort of divides the two going westwards, then they would have had much firmer ground, because it's much stonier, so it wouldn't have been ground up and it wouldn't have been quite so dusty. Those are my criticisms. But it's not these are mild criticisms, because it is a great victory. There's no question about it. And I think actually, where, and I've said it 100 times before, where I think Monty really, really scores points is in that kind of no-nonsense, kind of operational level, understanding the limitation of your men, all that kind of stuff. I think that's just invaluable. And there is a kind of sort of, no one is any question about who is in charge. And that has been the big problem with 8th Army ever since its inception the previous autumn, that who is in charge has been slightly up for grabs. And there's been too many people kind of, it's been
taking their own initiative. And
Yeah, but not doing it in cahoots. They're not all singing from the same hymn sheet.
The other thing about this period of the war, though, is that you are now getting the American kit coming in too.
Yes.
So it's the beginning. I mean, in the Churchill sense of it, the beginning, a big beginning of the end. It's certainly taking on the framework and the character of how it's going to end, which is that the American material might is now coming into play, which is maybe what Churchill's referring to as the thing he knows that maybe other people don't know quite to such an extent. This is the first proper round of shipping, and it's we talked to Dan Tobin about this, about the Shermans that are available in El Alamein. They're like rushed ahead of the conventional shipping, and there's a diversion to the shipping made to make that happen. And it's maybe, I mean, it's notable for that too, isn't it? I mean, the other thing that Montgomery does in this battle, and this is the frustrating thing with him as his own chronicler, is he says it all went according to plan. It didn't.
No.
All go according to plan, but he did manage to adapt to it, and having to change what he was doing to how it was turning out.
Yes.
Which, of course, is always the problem with Montgomery, where he goes, everything went according to plan. And you think, well, you're doing yourself down as a general here. You ran into a hitch, into a roadblock in what you were trying to do, and you worked your way around it. You managed to get your army to work its way around it, and your men were up to that, and your divisional commanders are up to that, and your brigade and battalion commanders were up to that task. And this is, of course, the British Army that supposedly lacks initiative, that supposedly doesn't think for itself, that only does what's in its orders. And here he is actually, and in 1942, especially when it's not got the professionalism that it has at the end of 1944 into 45, where it's all been shaken down and everyone's super seasoned in combat by Christmas of 44. That actually here you have the thing that the British are always accused of being incapable of, which is being flexible, being tactically and operationally able to sort of step around what's not working for you and all those sort of things. And he's doing all that. He's walking, talking, and chewing gum at the same time, which is what generals have not been able to do up to this point.
Yes, and he's a very visible general as well, which is the other thing that's very important. And I think what is interesting between Lightfoot and Supercharger, which are the two kind of phases of the battle, Lightfoot is sort of grinding down to a kind of sort of to a halt, and it needs a whole kind of change of approach. It hasn't been the big breakthrough that he hoped.
Yeah.
And Alexander comes up and sees where he's planning Supercharge and thinks it's not in the right place, but knows better than to say to Monty, that's in the wrong place, you need to change it. Yeah. So he has a quiet word with Freddie de Gangan and goes, you might want to suggest that perhaps this might be a slightly more advantageous way of doing it. So de Gangan goes, I wonder, sir, whether maybe we should do it this way. And he goes, you know what, that's quite yes, I was thinking that already, and then changes it and takes all the credit, which of course is fine because he's Monty and that's what he always does. I think the other thing that's really interesting about that period is that when Mary Cunningham, the commander of the Desert Air Force, is going to Auchinleck, it'd be a really good thing if we could have our headquarters together, our tactical headquarters together. And Auchinleck takes quite a dim view of that. And then when Montgomery turns up, Cunningham says, I really think it's a good idea if we have, Desert Air Force headquarters and 8th Army headquarters, are in the same place. Monty goes, absolutely 100%. And Monty just gets the importance of air power and how air power can be harnessed to what you're doing on the ground. He really understands that. And I wonder whether that's also because Montgomery's fought in France and seen how the Luftwaffe do it with the Germans, whereas Auchinleck has been in Norway, but it's not quite the same thing, but in northern Norway hasn't had quite that exposure, Indian Army man, all the rest of it, where you don't really, there's no such thing as sort of tactical air power in 1942. And so you see this development. First of all, you see Desert Air Force absolutely hammering the Panzer Army Africa at the Gazala battle, then completely saving 8th Army's bacon when they're in full retreat. I mean, it absolutely stops the Panzer Army Africa's kind of from catching up and overtaking 8th Army as it's retreating back to the Alamein line. And then at Alam Halfa, you see it play a decisive role in hammering Rommel's panzers in Rommel's last attack in the desert, certainly in Egypt anyway. And then the RAF plays an absolutely vital role in the Battle of Alamein, so much so that even Montgomery admits it. He is very, very big in his praise of the RAF and the Desert Air Force particular. And what is very interesting is when one does look at personal testimonies of Germans and Italians, particularly in the Battle of the Alamein, all they do is go on about air power. It's absolutely amazing. They just go on and on about it. We were bombed again. Yet again, we were bombed. And the number of sort of Stukas and 109s that are coming over and hassling 8th Army is just absolutely is nothing compared to what the Desert Air Force are doing. And they're doing it round the clock as well. So they're providing daytime close air support, and then RAF Middle East is then coming over their Wellingtons and kind of, B-26s.
But is it not also because Montgomery has figured that what you have to do is join it all together?
Yes.
You can't have the tanks herring off on their own, and you can't have the infantry trying to keep up somehow, and that the artillery fire plans aren't coded into what everyone's doing, and everyone needs to talk to everyone, and that's a thing he really gets, and that actually the Air Force isn't a separate fiefdom. It's actually part of the same effort. And that, it is interesting that at the end of the First World War, the RAF are paired, or not the end, but towards the end of the First World War, they're paired off to become their own thing and have their own structures, their own way of looking at stuff. And then the Army have to develop the Army Air Corps because actually they need to be able to talk directly to some people, that putting the two tents next to each other are giving you a huge clue that maybe the RAF being its own force isn't necessarily the brightest idea. I mean, which might upset RAF listeners, but that maybe that these things being integrated is too important, to have been overlooked. I mean, it is kind of amazing that has to happen. Yeah. It is sort of it's like any innovation that's on reflection or in retrospect completely obvious. But that they have to do that is sort of staggering, really. And it takes someone going, well, I think your tent should be next to my tent. God,
No, it's amazing.
What were you all thinking before that, you muppets? Anyway,
but it is amazing, and it's an amazing place. It's if you ever get a chance, it is really worth going because because you always talk about the sort of Mitterrand Ridge and the Ruwaiset Ridge and all this kind of stuff, and you kind of think, well, what is that? And the Almhalfa Ridge, of course, and you think, well, what does that mean? What is a ridge? When I think of a ridge, I think of something that's sort of 500, 600 feet, sticking up in the air or whatever. And it's not. It's really, really small. I mean, you can be on the kind of Ruwaiset Ridge and not even know you're on it. But
it's all quite slight, isn't it?
It's slight, yeah. But suddenly, when you're on the top of it, you suddenly go, right, I get it, because suddenly you can see for miles where before your viewing window was actually quite short. And so it's
because you do read about in the desert where people literally they go round a corner and suddenly the enemy's right there on top of them. They haven't seen them because of these subtle folds.
That's right.
And they're tripping over each other, even though there's no apparent cover.
Yeah.
In the way there is in Italy or North Africa or in fact anywhere else in the world, you can still be tucked away in a fold in the desert that no one ever sees you in.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Anyway, that's amazing.
Anyway, well.
But you
go on, Jim.
Well, I was going to say, you've been doing sort of your universal carrier. It's obviously a key feature of the Ape Army in the Western Desert. You've been busy.
Well, everywhere they were everywhere, weren't they? Literally everywhere. The carrier, yeah.
It does look amazing. Your current project, though.
It's coming along nicely.
Yeah.
I mean,
it's nice to see you grow up and mature in your modelling over this in COVID.
well, yeah, okay. Well, yeah, I'm enjoying doing it. It was meant to be a short build, but I've been doing it sort of 10-minute stages a day rather than.
Well, I've been really enjoying the films, I've got to say.
Yeah. And the little figures are good, and I think I'm gonna do Peter Caddick Adams because I've got a bloke that I think looks.
Well, Peter Caddick Adams as he was as a 20-year-old subaltern.
Yes. What regiment was Peter in? What was he?
I think he was in the Staffordshire Yeomanry.
Okay, wonderful, brilliant.
Something like that. He's up in Staffs or what's that other one?
But I've got this guy in a duffel. I've got a guy in a duffel coat. He's got a green beret at the moment. But I'll redo the beret and I'll paint his moustache off and he'll turn into Peter.
Well, he'll be absolutely thrilled about that. But also, I just can't get over all the sort of other stuff, the aging palettes and the kind of the clobber that can go with it.
Yeah, well, because the thing is, I was trying to sort of keep to just the Tamiya stuff when I first started this, because that's what I used to use when I was a kid, and I was being nostalgic. But then you just have to. I mean, it's the internet, isn't it? You have a little look, and you think, God, that rust paint looks good, and if I use that as this and combine all these techniques. But what I've not done is watched any actual tutorials myself and learned these things. It's all stuff I've been figuring out for myself.
Well, that's the best way, isn't it?
Well, yeah, and you want them to look. I want them to look the way I want them to look, rather than the way someone else might do them. Anyway, I mean, it's fun, and there's going to be a lot of booze on the Universal Carrier. That's
quite right too. Quite right
because
too.
It's the We Have Ways independent company Universal Carrier, and I think I'm going to put Sherman Yeomanry decals on it. But I need or Guards Armoured. I can't decide. I need to fight. I've got loads and loads and loads of transfers that I bought. In April, I found a site in America where he does them all. He does absolutely everybody's markings. So I'll pick something. Anyway,
what's happened to the models of you and me?
Well, they're nearly done. They're nearly finished. They had mud applied to them yesterday. There's a little bit of film. They'll crop up again in the film. And then there's a bridge that this is all going to a broken, shattered bridge. This is all going to be sat upon. But I need to find a way of mounting the bridge and then doing the water. So that's going to take some figuring out as well. But it's nice to have a way to pass the time during lockdown too, isn't it?
And what's your beef about aircraft? Because you just can't make them muddy enough.
They're just too difficult. They tend to be more pristine than. What I like about the tanks is that they're left out in the rain and they're sort of covered in filth and muck and oil stains, and the planes are always a little bit. I mean, you do see pictures of sort of scuzzy planes, but they're never quite as scuffed and foul as say a Brenco carrier, which is not a tank, of course. That's the thing everyone needs to remember. It's not a tank. After last week's Twitter argument that I caused, it's not a tank.
That was very funny. I did enjoy that.
It's not.
Quite nice to observe from a distance as well.
It was an Abbott. It's a self-propelled gun. It's not a fucking tank. Anyway, what I do need to say is thank you all for your lovely comments about our extra edition of the podcast this weekend. To mark Remembrance Sunday, it was fabulous to chat with Glyn Prusser, former historian of the Commonwealth War Graves Commission. I thought that was an amazing chat.
He's just a really nice guy. It would be good to get him to talk about the Navy at some point because
that book's very
always
good.
Say, we go, God, we never do enough on the Navy, and we don't do enough on the Navy. So it would be good.
Having just wanged on about Alamein for 15 minutes, you're quite right. But if you didn't get a chance to listen this weekend, do try to catch up. Glyn was a fabulous guest, and it will open your eyes to the story of the CWGC.
Yeah, that was
he
good,
used a phrase. That phrase he used from the mother of the 17-year-old killed in Normandy. I mean, into the mosaic of victory, our most precious piece was laid. It was absolutely heartbreaking. What was lovely as well was yesterday when we, because this is for tomorrow, Tuesday, isn't it? So when we put it out on Sunday, the reaction was very, very nice to see, and people sharing their stories and stories of the CWGC sites they visited and all that sort of stuff, and what it means to people. And what I really liked as well is we didn't get into, and Glyn alluded to it briefly, we didn't get into the poppy debate, because I don't think the poppy debate is a debate. I think it's a series of tedious postures, and it was nice to not even go near there and to talk about the history of the thing, because it is really, really interesting, the gear shift in the First World War, from soldiers being the scum of the earth that no one cared about, and Tommy Atkins being reviled, and that Kipling idea of everyone hating Tommy Atkins until he's required, and how that change came about. I think that was really, really, that's the sort of fascinating thing, and sort of the another example of the First World War and the wars of the 20th century literally changing everything, literally changing how we think about ourselves, our relationships with government, our society, what society can ask of you, and what it, which is after all a question doing the rounds at the moment, what can the government ask of us? And if wearing a mask is all you're being asked to do, that feels to me like a bare minimum, but there we go.
Well, it is in the big scheme of things, isn't it? I mean, I thought it was really interesting, and I really enjoyed the little extract of Spite you did, and I love that poem by Keith Douglas. It's absolutely heartbreaking. Yeah. But then someone on Twitter, I think he was called @DB20-something, he sent us a link over to Eisenhower with visiting the Omaha Beach, the one at Colville, the cemetery at Colville, the big cemetery at Colville in 1964. And Ike just spoke so brilliantly about it. And he said, that day, 6th of June, was the day my son graduated from West Point, and he came out and joined the war, and he made it. And I've now got lots of lovely grandchildren, and I look around here and I just think of all those boys that didn't make it. And I thought it was really, really moving. But it also got me thinking about... I suddenly started just remembering that essay by Ernie Pyle in San Pietro in early 1944, when he says, "I was at the foot of the mule trail the night they brought Captain Wasco down," and it's probably one of the most famous bits of reportage from the war. And I was thinking about Ernie Pyle, and I've been rereading him a little bit recently, because I always end up sort of writing about him a bit in my books.
Yes, but he always crops up.
He crops up because he was just so brilliant. I mean, anyone who hasn't read Ernie Pyle's writing, I really, really urge you to do it. And you can buy the books, but sort of Kindle editions, but you can see some of his famous essays online. You can find them really easily. But he really was the guy who started that whole a complete sea change of how people write about war. And it's another big shift, in the same way that the Commonwealth War Graves, or the Imperial War Graves Commission was, suddenly sort of egalitarianising kind of death on the battlefield. In the same way, he's doing that about writing about the war and reporting about the war.
Yeah.
And he is this really interesting character, because I think he's only 44 or 45 when he's killed by a machine gun bullet on Okinawa in April 1945 or May 1945. But anyway, at the very end of the war. But he's sort of, he looks a lot older. He looks 10 years older. He's bald. He's grey. He's small. he smokes too much. He's deeply neurotic. He gets divorced from his wife, Jerry, then decides he needs to marry her again. He has bouts of depression. He's got, the black dog really badly. He's got what we would call in I suppose today, serious mental health issues. He's got a pathological fear of failure. And yet he's absolutely beloved by the guys, the troops, and all the servicemen that he comes across, whether they be on ships, whether they be at airfields, whether they be at the battlefront. And it's interesting because, he starts off as a journalist writing for the Scripps Howard newspapers. I think they have something like 300 newspapers across the US. Yeah. And originally he's an aviation correspondent. And then they give him a kind of wide brief in the mid-30s to just go around and record what you see of everyday folk in the US.
Yeah.
And it's quite sort of whimsical is not quite the word. But what he does is it's just very personal. It's very kind of sort of like having a conversation with the guy next door. And it's sort of, and I was down in Des Moines and I bumped into this guy and this guy said to me and it got me thinking about such and such. And it's all that kind of tone of voice. And then he just transferred that to the war. So he gets sent over to London in the Blitz and does his reports back from London. Then he goes over to North Africa in Operation Torch in 1942. And then he's there in Sicily. Then he's there in southern Italy. He's one of the kind of chosen few for D-Day. Goes all the way through northern, northwest Europe, and then eventually goes out to the Pacific. And he becomes so famous, and his writings are so famous that everyone wants to meet him. Everyone wants to be in one of his columns because he always name checks everyone. So he goes, I remember when I was doing my Normandy book, there was this amazing description of the capture of Cherbourg, and he joins the 9th Infantry Division, and he's with a lieutenant, I should say, called Orion Shockley, and he asks him about his name and how unusual it is, and Lieutenant Shockley hails from wherever he hails from, Missouri or whatever it was, and names the town and everything. And lo and behold, Shockley then subsequently wrote his own memoir too, so he could sort of marry them up, which was quite interesting. But, he just writes with such incredible sensitivity and just such incredible kind of evocation of the moment and what he's witnessing and the mood and the sights and the smells. There's just no one better, but you suddenly see where all those post-war writers... Like Cornelius Ryan, who was a Irish war correspondent for the Daily Telegraph, I think, where they all get it from. It all goes back to Ernie Pyle.
Yeah. Right, well, we need to take a short break while I brush the salt off my self-propelled gun. And if you don't get the reference, you haven't been watching my model-making masterclass, which I'll tell you about after the break. We'll be back in 2 swishes of a rust-covered brush. Welcome back to We Have Ways of Making You Talk with me, Al Murray, and James Holland. It's not a tank, all right? It's not a tank. It is a self-propelled gun. By the way, what we've been doing, if you've missed them, is I've been doing a series of little films of me making a little Bren gun carrier, Universal Carrier, Mark II, little films of how I do it. So we've called it a masterclass on Twitter, and I'm slightly a blush at the notion. It's how I like to go about it, and it's the weathering. It's making it filthy and look like it's been left out in the rain, or it's had to drive through some muddy gorge to deliver James and I, because it's going to be a little model of James and I, and loads of
we're in the
booze.
carrier, are we?
Oh, we're in the carrier.
Oh, that is exciting. Okay.
That's the idea. We're in the carrier with some booze. And I'm going to do the bridge and the diorama with the bridge and all that. So that's on the @We Have Ways pod. It's been up with there. We've done 5 or so far. There'll be 7 or 8, or even 9 or 10, depending on how long it takes me to finish the darn thing.
They're great fun. They're really good.
It's good fun. It's good fun to do as well. Filming while painting is proving quite difficult, which there'll be, I think, one of the clips that is coming up. There's me cursing, having to do both. The other thing to remind people of, not regular listeners, is the advantage of joining our Patreon, because last week on Thursday we had an amazing evening on Thursday evening, like the greatest dinner party conversation possible. A huge thanks to 630 people who joined us live on the internet as we did a wild 90-minute improv of Second World War history with James, myself sort of chairing, and the brilliant Peter Caddick-Adams, and live from the former SS headquarters outside Warsaw, Dr. Alex Ritchie. That was a cracking night, wasn't it?
Was a lot of fun, yeah. It was really good. And you know, it sort of helps that we're all old mates, because we all kind of sort of know... We all sort of know each other, and you get that. So for me, it was literally just sitting around with three mates having a bottle of wine. You know, it was great fun. But brilliant. It was nice hearing people's comments on the side as well.
Yeah, and some good questions. And of course, Peter incurred the wrath of Vladimir Putin.
Oh yes, he kept having a few internet issues, didn't he?
I mean, I have to say, Peter's comic timing is pretty strong. You know, he makes some crack about Putin. 90 seconds later, he's off air. His internet crashes, and the FSB come around and replace him with a double.
But he still looked immaculate.
Yes, of course he did. His cravat. Right. So, so if you fancy a slice of that particular action, the live casts are on our Patreon. You can find us. We have ways making you talk Patreon. And there's loads of other stuff with that, audiobooks and a discussion as well from our regulars, because there's a core of regular independent company members. Those of you know. Those of you who don't, maybe now you do. Okay, so let's do a couple of questions, because you know what? The thing we have a sort of outline. It's calling it a script is probably too strong. We have a sort of outline, and it said brief chat at the top, and that was the Alamein, quarter of an hour about Alamein, by the way, the brief chat. When we were just supposed to sort of say, how are you getting on? Are those tomatoes that you brought for lockdown ripe yet? Okay, so question. We have a question for us. First of all, a preposterous message from Tony Bean via Twitter. Hello, Alan James, loving the podcast. Funny thing, I started listening on Spotify, and without knowing it, I was playing the episodes at 1.5 times normal speed. I got to episode 21 without realising. I actually thought you were... you speak and think at that speed, like you were on drugs. Oh, it's the perverting edition of We Have Ways. Al, your laugh at 1.5 speed is extraordinary. I urge you to try it. Listening to Arnhem series now at normal speed. Thank goodness.
Yeah, God, that must be a bit frenetic.
Well, what do you slowed down sound like at 1.5 speed? You pretty sound normal, because there's the Beer 52 commercials. You sounded as though.
Do you like beer? James Holland here. Do you like beer?
Right. Okay. So a question from Graham Hutton, and this has come to us via Twitter. Hi, love your podcast. My granddad was captured at Saint-Valery-en-Queux early in the war, and I've always wanted to know more about it. I remember him telling me that he watched the last boat leave as it was bombed, and it was bombed as it left, and the sea was red. Yet the books on it say there was no evacuation. Can you shed any light?
Yeah, sure. And early on in the war, it was actually the 12th of June, 1940. So what happened was, because the French Corps wouldn't let 51st Highland Division, under whom they were subordinate, pull back before it was too late, Rommel's 7th Panzer Division cut in behind them to the coast north of Le Havre, and they were forced back to St. Valery, where they had absolutely no choice but to surrender. Now, the hope was that overnight of the 11th and 12th, the Royal Navy would come in and evacuate them, and they were offshore, and that was all good. But there was an absolutely... there was a pea super to beat all pea supers, and they literally just couldn't get in. They couldn't see what they were doing. So they had to turn around, and the 51st Highland Division had to surrender, and General Fortune had to hand over to Rommel.
Yes, there's that photo of him looking absolutely gutted, isn't there?
Yeah, just
spitting
steaming.
And furious and steaming.
So that was why, basically. So there was an effort. There was an effort to pick them up, and I think a handful of people were picked up on the 11th, if I remember rightly. But obviously, the vast majority of the 51st Highland Division were captured. And it's one of those things that they felt abandoned, and they weren't really. I mean, what everyone forgets is that the reason the 51st Highland Division were fighting was because they'd been holding a stretch of the Maginot Line, and so they were south of
the German flanking
Somme, during when the German Army Group A swept in south of the main thrust. They were south of that, so they were cut off from the rest of the British Expeditionary Force, moved over from the Maginot Line to kind of help be one of the divisions in the French line, for Case Red, which was the next bit, the next German operation to sweep southwards and kind of clear up the rest of France. And so they were there, and we were still an ally of France until France surrendered, and that was what our job was. And there's always this thing, we were abandoned by Churchill, and they weren't abandoned by Churchill at all. They were doing what they were supposed to do, which was fight alongside the French as an ally. It's just that the French didn't command them very well.
on road. There was a division on rotation into the Maginot Line, wasn't there? And it was their turn, basically.
Yeah. And there was also the First Armoured Division, which hadn't really been deployed at this point. And they managed, and they were sort of in reserve, and they were further eastward, so they were able to kind of pull back across the Seine, and that was all fine. And they all kind of sort of evacuated further south in Normandy. But that is why they were all put in the bag.
Okay, Jörn von Kampenhausen, which is a We Have Ways Gold Star name. You get instant platinum recognition for that. Jörn von Kampenhausen.
Yeah, that's a really
Hi guys, very great podcast. Please keep up the good quality. Well, there's a request.
That sounds like a new movie film, doesn't it?
Have you seen it yet? It's very funny.
Is it funny?
Yeah, it is. Yeah, I recently read the book, The Real Heroes of Telemark, by Ray Mears about Operation Grouse. Was it really such a game changer as it is claimed in the book? Cheers, Jörn.
No.
Yes.
No.
No, you go first. Yes.
I
would argue it was because it just put a stop to it. It capped it. There would be from there on. There was no way back for a German atomic bomb. There was no way of it ever happening. It capped it. It was like they capped the well of the thing. That's what I'd say. I mean, you're going to argue they were never that serious about it. The fact even the mere fact they're relying on Norwegian heavy water shows they aren't serious about it themselves. That Germany hasn't got this thing on its feet, and they're spending the money on the V weapons anyway. And you've got a diversion of effort into all sorts of German solutions that they can't afford anyway. And you could argue that the atom scientists aren't serious about it too, and all the clever people have buggered off to America. Have I got that right?
Yeah, but that's quite a convincing argument against. But there's one more killer line, which is that in July 1942, they've already agreed to downgrade the atomic project and basically not give it funding.
Yeah, but it caps it. That's what I mean. Is this means that even if they change their minds after that, it's just too much to do.
But the heavy water's never going to help them anyway. I mean, the point is that in July 1942, and it's first launched in October 1942, and then they have to wait the whole winter basically until I think it's February 1943, if I remember rightly, or January. I can't remember when it actually is. But because it's the first ever glider operation that the British mount, and it's a complete fiasco. And the commander of the glider pilots regiment gets captured or killed. All the glider troops get killed or captured, and they're executed in woods outside Oslo. So, but the team then are the SOE team of Norwegian basic commandos, effectively. That they then have to spend the whole winter out in these huts on the mountains, kind of surviving off kind of damp moss and all that kind of stuff.
But they love all that. Those people.
Yeah.
Those
but
kind of people love all that.
It is a brilliant episode of astonishing endurance, and they do pull off the damage to the heavy water plant. It just works perfectly. But it doesn't alter the fact that in July 1942, at a meeting with Speer and Goering, they decide that they are not going to back the atomic project, that it's too fraught, there isn't enough money, it's too complicated, it hasn't got much chance of succeeding, and therefore it's all over. So to that extent, the whole effort was sort of a bit of a waste of time, but we didn't know that at the time. And it doesn't detract from the fact that it's still an amazing operation. And it's incredibly important that you're constantly harrying the Germans all the time, wherever they have possessions, to keep them on their toes and keep troops. I mean, it's like 300,000 troops in Norway alone in 1945. So, and all this plays a part in that. So I would say it was a really, really important operation. And it also showed that what could be done. And it's also an amazing operation of collaboration between the Norwegians and the British, I think. And it was truly extraordinary by all those, everyone involved was properly heroic and properly brave and showed extraordinary endurance and all the rest of it to kind of sort of rival Scott of the Antarctica and all the rest of it. But was it really such a game changer as it is claimed in the book? The answer was no.
Yes. No, they cap the well. It means that Spear can't change his mind, and I mean, it is interesting that the Nazis, the Nazi government just decides they can't do it. That the atom bomb is beyond them, because bloody well they'd have used it. They wouldn't have hesitated. In fact, they'd have probably not bothered testing it. They'd have used the first one that they thought might work. Wouldn't they? I mean,
they did explode that dirty bomb in because there were two rival camps. There was the Kaiser Wilhelm Institute people who were broadly anti-Nazi, or certainly not Nazi, and then there was the other guy. And I can't remember what he was called. He was called Kurt something beginning with D. I can't remember off the top of my head. But he was a rabid Nazi, and I think there were only 93 people involved in the entire project on two different camps. So you had two camps, each of about kind of 40 each, 45 each. One of the in the Kaiser Wilhelm Institute and the other one not. And, when you think about the Manhattan Project and you think 120,000 people involved in kind of untold billions, it's sort of, it makes you realise just sort of how far off they are from ever achieving it. But the Nazi camp do set off a dirty bomb. I think it's on the 3rd of March 1945. And they use local concentration camp prisoners to see the blast effect. And it does create a mushroom cloud, and it does, create a huge blinding flash of light and all that kind of stuff, because they are using kind of sort of really, really incredibly volatile, elements involved. But it doesn't cause an awful lot of damage.
Well, there we go. So James and I disagree on that one. That's excellent. They're definitely a very important operation. Also, there's nothing those sort of commandos love more than being left on the side of a mountain over the winters and eating their own toe fungus. Right? Okay.
No, that is true.
One last thing. Alan Mills says, really fantastic podcast. I love every minute of it. I joined the Royal Navy in 1976, and I'm still serving. Wow. Spending all my career on minesweepers. Gosh, that's a long time. So to answer your question about having someone on the bow of the ship shooting at buoyant mines, that's old school. This guy, he has listened to all of them. We talked about that ages ago, about having to sit on the front with a rifle and shoot mines. The drill was to sink them, not detonate them, leaving them on the seabed and no threat to shipping. Until now, of course, as we have 250, 500 pounds of unstable high explosives that are constantly being brought up by shipping boats. It's believed that there is still about 75% of the ordnance laid in both wars unaccounted for.
Wow, holy moly.
Jeepers!
75%.
That's a lot of explosive. I mean, surely it becomes inert after a while. I don't know. I mean, I don't know anything about it.
No, I don't think it does it? There's that bit in Finding Nemo, isn't there, where they go across.
Yes, that's right. Yeah, the sharks find the old sub and the mines. Anyway, that's all from us today. Thank you so much for listening. On that note, thanks again if you listened at the weekend to the Remembrance Day edition. The models are going to keep making that Bren carrier, don't you worry, and the scenario for it to sit in. And we'll hopefully see you on the live stream on Thursday as well, those of you who are patrons. Thanks very much. Thanks again. Cheerio.
Cheerio.